This is some Resident Evil scene, man. Damn. Oh! I am a joke, a meme, a failure. I'm promising a 2-part retrospective and all that. Oh well. Could be worse. This game exceeded any expectation I could have had, and I'd confidently say you should be expecting more Trails related videos in the future, because I just have to check out what this main series has to offer. I have been trailing for way too long. Me and my big mouth, man. I do follow up on things eventually though. You at least gotta give me that. I just don't know in what year and at what pace. Returning to Ore today, I have fittingly kept up with Genius Sonority's development cycle, except I took a little extra time, for the sake of quality preservation. And other copium nonsense, I tell myself. Pokémon Colosseum made waves in the world of Pokémon, at least in my perception of it. To state the obvious, it was the first 3D role-playing installment in the Pokémon series, but I give fuck all about all that. It was just substantially impressive. A game that wasn't afraid to switch things up with an actual half-decent villain arc story, experienced through the eyes of the coolest protagonist a Pokémon has ever seen. Set in the coolest, coziest and mature world with all of its cool looking buildings and environments, baller-ass characters with goofy-ass names, and the most stylish and extravagant animations. Till date. All of it colored in by a bit of a darker tone and atmosphere. An immaculate vibe on top of which it manages to create a sense of difficulty through its very limited pool of Pokémon to choose from and its unorthodox level curve. Not to mention it skipping the tedious introductory part of the usual Pokémon adventure by setting you up with 2 level 25 nigh impossible to obtain in the main series evolutions. Thus effectively eliminating the mind-numbing tutorials and the hours spent raising your little buddies against a bunch of brain-dead and weaker than a paper bag AIs, starting you off right when things become engaging. See what I mean? Quality gameplay. Now look, I'm not trying to convince anybody Colosseum is a perfect game. Because it isn't. It couldn't be, due to the limitations of the era it was created in. After about 21 years, it's dated. Dated when it comes to the graphics, dated when it comes to the available Pokémon, dated when it comes to the available movesets and lack of physical special split. Building a coherent storyline is also not one of its strongest aspects, if I'm being brutally honest. But it impressed me, because it dared to be different. A unique and memorable path I wish the series would have built upon. And thank God, they did. Colosseum's home screen kinda clears. I'm not even gonna lie about that. Pokémon XD Gale of Darkness was released a mere 15 months after the coolest and edgiest adventure the series has ever seen. Once again developed by Genius Sonority, you could count on this being in very good hands, as they had the prior tools and knowledge necessary to further flesh out Colosseum's skeleton. Is what was implied until the man, the myth, the legend, Reggie himself, hopped on an IGN interview in March of 2005. To start yapping about a bunch of shit. XD would not be a sequel to Colosseum, but instead would be more akin to the GBA titles. A brand new build. A brand new game that really plays off the RPG aspects. If you loved Ruby and Sapphire, you were going to love XD. It might be a bit of a stretch, but I'm kinda maybe sorta noticing a few similarities here. It could be just me though. I don't know. In hindsight, who knows what the purpose of this tomfoolery Reggie bullshit really was. The game would release 5 months after this interview, and thus would have been mostly completed at the time. So I don't know who was trying to hype up with this misinformation. It was most definitely a sequel, and a worthwhile one at that. To an extent. Pokémon XD Gale of Darkness is universally believed to be the superior version of Pokémon Colosseum, streamlining what Colosseum established and building further upon its foundation to make it an all-around more enjoyable experience. While its improvements are indeed undeniable, my love-hate relationship has only grown as the years passed by, and additional games and generations were added to the proverbial pile. XD Gale of Darkness is the better game, but its creative direction is closer, too close, to the mainline entries prior and after its release. It's like some TPC or Game Freak bozo was present all throughout the development cycle, being all like,
"You will not shine us again, you filthy peasant!"
Thus making them add a bunch of shit similar to the mainline entries. This, to me, has made XD lose some of the charm, character and originality that made me fall in love with Colosseum. To get you to understand why I've come to adopt this rather controversial perspective, I hereby present you the second of 2 retrospectives. A deep dive into Pokémon XD, A Gale of Darkness. I guess it does have more character than I remember. Pokémon XD Gale of Darkness takes place 5 years after the events of Pokémon Colosseum. Cypher has been defeated, and the region of Ore is no longer a crime-riddled Wild West. The life of Swagmaster Wes is a thing of the distant past. You now take on the role of Michael, another 10-year-old generic as fuck forgettable protagonist without any remarkable personality traits whatsoever, who spends his days living at a Pokémon lab. As the introductory boat abduction blatantly hinted at, however, things might not be as peaceful as they seem. Cypher is in fact still alive and kicking, having another go at taking over the world by using the mindless slave fighting machines known as Shadow Pokémon. A 10-year-old boy, of course, being deemed the most qualified individual to prevent this catastrophe. Okay, I'm sold. Michael is a disappointment, as is the overarching feel and tone of the game. Ore now feels closer to any other region, distancing itself from the more mature and sinister thematic approach of Colosseum. Instead, the atmosphere and dialogue feels noticeably lighter. The bitter and mature remarks have been exchanged for humor, comedy even. And yeah, it's funny, alright. Chobin's a highlight in particular, with his inventions that do not hide existing for the sole purpose of scamming some fools. And the Robo-Groudon bit is an iconic piece of Pokémon history to me. A whole ass summoning sequence for the goofiest of goofs. I love shit like that. A neat little touch is how Professor Kaminko deems the Robot Kyogre version useless after the player destroys Robo-Groudon, only for it to end up bringing you to Cypher's lair at the end of the game. It's got tons of these neat little touches and jokes, i.e. this poster playfully mocking Gonzeb's mustache, or the Psyduck suffering from standing next to a television. He's just like me, man. For real. Opposed to the Scarlets and Violets of the world, XD's humor actually hits, and the plot is still in the upper echelons of Pokémon plots. I mean, how couldn't it be? With its soulless fighting machines, baller-ass characters with wacky names, and the Power Rangers pulling a "We're all Squidward" amidst Cypher's sneaky operation of replacing every single Phoenix City citizen. Its pacing and sense of progression is also easily one of the best till date, not only outshining 18 years worth of games released after, aside from the absolute
GOAT.
but also Colosseum itself. Sure, transitioning from one area to another by random ass emails, or some goofball in the outskirts stand claiming to have escaped from Cypher's hideout, that then never has any place in the plot whatsoever again. It still isn't ideal, but XD never makes you roam around areas to the point of oversaturation, something the mainline games are very much guilty of. Little me could not get out of these fucking mountains, man. It moves the plot to a new area at a great pace, to keep things new and exciting, as well as adding new towns and unique dungeons like the shipwreck that is the SS Libra, and the bottom-up camera angle badass as fuck, a Cypher key layer. I fuck with it. And don't get things twisted. But it just doesn't hit the same as Colosseum. Starting as soon as the introductory tutorial section. Rather than escaping a criminal hideout by blowing up their base, you now play a game of hide and seek with your increasingly more annoying sister, gather some machine parts at Gage Import, and gather info from vendor at Mount Battle, before finally being able to rescue Professor Crane that abruptly got kidnapped after finding your sister. It's fine as an intro, but it's just dull as hell, and blends in with the tired tropes of Oak's parcel and Wally's catching tutorial. A bland and unoriginal vibe from the get-go, and that plagues the game all throughout. While I showed appreciation for the comedic value this game brings to the table, it pains me to see the mature character dialogue and the darker gradient of their choice of words notably regress to the snooze-fest service level I've become used to from this franchise. No longer did I get a sense of serious overtones in any conversation. No longer do the characters leave an everlasting impression on me like the Cypher admins and Mr. Ominous and Sinister himself. NASCAR! No longer do the girls playfully flirt with you. Because, well, you're a small child now. It pains me even more to see them get rid of the criminal underground that is the Under. Easily the coolest area in Pokémon Colosseum. That simply has no place in the thematic approach to this game. Myra B got the short end of the stick as well, only existing because he's a popular character. Relegated to the goofy-ass role of ineptly trying to kickstart his own criminal empire. Without success. While inferior to Colosseum, he still takes the cake for theme song of the game though. And then you got a dime a dozen, uninspired, empty shell of a protagonist to experience it all through. A 16-year-old's first scooter replacing the petrol gobbler to fit the character. Or lack thereof. Of course. And I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I miss Rui, man. A fucking mechanical arm just doesn't feel the same. It's a step back from what made Colosseum so endearing. Or rather, a kick in the nuts when I got wind of XD's original plot. Instead of Cypher being run by Grandpa Grievel, it would be none other than motherfucking Wes. Wes's story arc was meant to take a 180. In a shocking turn of events, the Colosseum playthrough was meant to take on the role of villain arc. Wes's heroic deeds would have primarily served his personal agenda, a cover to snag and train Pokémon for his own evil plan. Taking out Evice wasn't meant to save the world, but to clean up the final obstacle in Wes's way of becoming Cypher Spearhead himself, and rebuild the organization his way from the ground up. slowly but surely going mad with power, until the XD protagonist would put a halt to it. Man, this would have been the coolest shit Pokemon has ever done, and it's not close. However, somewhere during the development cycle, it was decided this was too dark for the Rated E for Everyone franchise, alongside not wanting to spoil Colosseum's plot for those playing through XD first, which could have easily been solved by explicitly referring to it as a sequel. But okay. And thus, the idea was canned. Instead adopting the watered down idea we ended up receiving, which is still pretty decent, but doesn't distinguish itself from the Horde like Colosseum was able to do. Not in atmosphere, not in dialogue, not in overarching storyline. Instead taking on the title of one of the best of the traditional. And that just fucking sucks, because XD's gameplay truly was cooking up something.
Help, I'm in a Star Wars movie scene!
Huh? XD Gale of Darkness quite literally used Colosseum as its base, presumably editing its files for the sake of efficiency, aka being able to copy-paste locations, designs, animations, and all that jazz. An assumption that doesn't just seem sensible, but is invigorated by the sheer amount of leftover and often accessible Colosseum data in its game files.
Which I made a video on that is really bad but still pretty funny, so please watch it. I have a non-existing family to feed.
And thus, what XD really is the polished version of the rough Colosseum Diamond. Or so is the general consensus. I, however, am not as enthusiastic about the game's direction. What Colosseum did so well was identifying and eliminating the increasingly less interesting, making me edge closer to shutting the game off, opening sections of the accustomed adventure. Transforming the undemanding RPG into an engaging challenge by giving trainers competitive movesets and high-level Pokémon. And daring to switch up the idea of catching and raising Pokémon solely by stealing corrupted, soulless Pokémon machines from their owners. And not to mention the Evolution Starter Duo being the coolest choice imaginable. It dared to stand out against its peers. And XD let go of that, instead taking a step back to the oh so familiar comfort zone. So Michael starts the game off salamancing it up against a Metagross in what turns out to be a battle simulator at the lab, after which it quickly becomes apparent Espion and Umbreon are no more. Your starter now is an Eevee that's 15 levels lower, Still double the level of the Chikoritas and Charmanders, but much more in line with what we're used to anyway. Like its predecessor, XD is still all about the double battles, and thus, a few minutes into the game, you're presented with an unfailable Teddiursa catch to instantly get the 2 versus 2 going. A rather odd and somewhat underwhelming initial setup. I have to give it to them though. The way they present you the various EV upgrades after about an hour of gameplay is in fact commendable. You can even get the yin and the yang of the family relatively easy by having the sun or moon shard in your inventory upon level up. It still requires happiness to evolve, but in my original 2017 cross playthrough, it evolved the moment it first leveled up after acquiring the stone.
Well, what do you know, man? I'm fucking rich. Really? It loves me so much that it goes... Nice, it turns to an Espion already. I knew you loved me, man. This evolution sequence looks fucking sick. Very fucking nice. I really never thought this would happen, a level 12 Espion. Fucking easy. This took me 5 or 6 episodes? Nice.
So I'd say it's safe to conclude it starts off with its happiness, close to max to begin with. This time around my dumbass picked the worst evolution possible in Flareon, that can make little to no use of its high attack stat or its stab, as there still is no physical special split, and fire moves are in the special category. Brilliant as always, me. Brilliant as always. As much as I admired Genius Sonority's attempt to make up for it by giving the player the starter kit pretty much instantly, starting the game at level 10 brought about the exact feeling I expected it to. That feeling of... Hello? When does the game start? For the first 5 hours of its runtime, which was about a third of my total, taking it slower than the slowest snail. An awfully familiar feeling I experienced a little over a year ago at this point, saved by an open world inviting me to fill up the decks. XD, to an extent, brought back the cumbersome part of the adventure Colosseum rightfully dispatched of a year prior. You now again have to endure the autopilot gameplay type beat to get to the actual game, like generations 1 to 9 have been doing, and undoubtedly will continue to do so. To me, this is what I'd like to call a certified TPC moment. A claim backed up by XD's code, where a level 26 Jolteon and a level 30 Vaporeon can be found occupying unused starter slots, labeled as obtained from your dad. Whoever the fuck that is. This leads me to the assumption that the initial plan indeed was to leave the lame shit to rot away in the trash can. A plan, however, that appears to have been overruled by TPC's
But we've always done it like that.
Supervision, which unfortunately seems to be the prevailing influence in this game. It's just not the same, man. A common complaint plaguing Colosseum's image was how the game was supposedly too difficult. A claim I debunked in my video on it by beating it relatively unscathed by using a simple Nuzlocke rule set. It's one of the most fun and challenging official Pokémon experience you can get your hands on, continuously going up against strong opponents with competitive movesets that are controlled by a somewhat smart AI, identifying super effective weaknesses and weaker stats. Which in turn made me apply a continuous protect switch dynamic and strategically ponder over every last move. Admittedly, it isn't noob friendly, but it doesn't have to be. We got Generation 6 to 9 spearheading the noob movement anyway. XD is neither of those. It takes a step back from Colosseum, but is still nowhere near free Pokémon without 4 moves of final gym leaders. It's a moderately challenging game that is admittedly far more suitable to attract a wider audience than Colosseum would ever be. It even fittingly ramps up its difficulty for the final stretch of the game. Dark Isle, home of the Cypher Gang, is this huge, sprawling dungeon full of exciting, challenging and satisfying battles that makes for what is probably my favorite conclusion of any Pokémon game. It's an upgrade over Colosseum in any sense of the word. But who says a retrospective cannot be opinionated? As someone that's played one too many hours of competitive Pokémon, I prefer Colosseum. Getting to Dark Isle at my pace took a little under 14 hours. 14 hours of untroubled double battles and getting sludge poisoned by a coffee. 30%? My ass! I once again limited myself by using basic permadeath, no healing Nuzlocke type of rules, as well as only being allowed to catch 1 Pokémon per area. And yet, I experienced no trouble whatsoever until I suddenly had to work overtime in Dark Isle. Facing any opponent prior is no challenge whatsoever, as you are effortlessly able to match their level, but above all are going up against some weak sauce movesets. Sure, there's a handful of opponents still using strategies, like i.e. Gorgon and his Earthquake Protect nonsense, but seeing special attack heavy, non-stab boosted Celio use a physical ground type attack, that just hurts me a little, man. And even at the start of Dark, Lovrina is using a Corsola with Spike Cannon and Bubble Beam. XD's approach to the difficulty, it's for the better. But it is so fucking tough to let go of what impressed me in Colosseum. Unless you indubitably approve upon it. That is. XD's most significant improvements concern the most important aspect of the game. Pokémon. I passionately defended Genius Sonority's meager selection of 48 obtainable Pokémon in Pokémon Colosseum, because it forced the player to build a different team for just this once. It forced the player to acknowledge the existence of Pokémon beyond the usual suspects. I loved how Colosseum dared to derive from the narrative where most of the casual players end up with the same 6 Pokémon and essentially chose your team selection themselves. I am in the minority, however. Colosseum's limited selection was met with a lot of critique from the mainline fanbase. Blah 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 freedom, blah 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 bad Pokémon, and thus Genius Sonority took the middle ground. XD more than doubled the amount of obtainable Pokémon, with there being a total of 99 up for grabs, 83 of which are Shadow Pokémon. The outcome of this adjustment ended up being even better than I expected it to beforehand. You get the best of both worlds really. The gang is still limited enough to push the player towards creative team building, while simultaneously increasing said team building's flexibility, and thus the game's replayability as a whole. The distribution is a little poor, with a bunch of baller-ass Pokémon like Babenet and Barney the Dinosaur only becoming available in Cita Dark Isle. But it's dope to see more Gen 1 and 3 Pokémon instead of Gen 2's dominance in Pokémon Colosseum, nonetheless. You even get a brief taste of the in 2006 released Generation 4, as Munchlax and Bonsly both make an appearance in this one. Uncatchable, but really cool regardless. Having most of the cool kits available this late into the game kinda sucks donkey dick, but is somewhat made up for by the fantastic enhancements to the Shadow Pokémon. If you want to, you can pretty much purify and use them instantly if so desired, as my little Bayonet time-lapse will now demonstrate. Purifying Shadow Pokémon has been made much less tedious, done by either spending about 30 grand on these scents and rubbing your Pokémon gently. Okay. Or placing them in the time saver. That is the purification chamber. Look at these little guys vibing, man. The purification chamber was far too complicated for me as a kid, but it's easy to use once you get the gist of it. A Shadow Pokémon in the middle, purified Pokémon performing demonic rituals around it, type matchups and amount of Pokémon affecting the purification spacing. Shit's able to purify 9 Pokémon at the same time. Not that you're ever gonna reach that point, but it's a testament to how much improved XD's purification process really is. It's a no longer tedious, and I'd almost even say fast process, after the game's halfway point. Adequately holding on to the soulless machine idea, yet making them usable at a much greater pace. Shadow Pokémon straight up feel like a much better functioning mechanic in general. Thanks to the increased roster, there are now often multiple Shadow Pokémon on one's team to make your life miserable. Shadow moves are now ineffective against Shadow Pokémon and super effective against anyone else. Hyper mode is now reverse mode, which doesn't make that much of a difference, and they actually have a decent arsenal of moves now. Rather than Shadow Rush recoil bombing themselves into you, they now got Sand Attack, Mean Look and Hail type of moves, which Cast Form sadly didn't utilize with its Weather Ball to make the clip look cooler. Oh, and we cannot forget about the notorious BIG's fucking bullshit, of course.
Shadow End, what's that? Oh god, it's an attack. And it's super... It's killed. It just killed. He just instantly ended my Espion. Oh my god, I don't have the max revive, right? No, I only have a regular. Yeah, this blows.
The moves are even somewhat categorized into physical and special moves, somehow making this the start of the actual physical special splits that would come with Generation 4 and not too long afterwards. Unlike Colosseum, Shadow Pokémon aren't banished after a single encounter, but are instead used to give Myra B a reason to exist. It's safe to say, Myra B's empire hasn't exactly gotten its feet on the ground yet, as it's only him and these two useless ass goons representing its banner. Goons so useless in fact they need a Myra B tracker to not lose him out of sight. A tracker they can't even hold on to, as they drop it for the player to pick up after beating their ass for like the billionth time. This tracker will go off at random, alerting you Myra B has appeared. Upon which you can go confront him and get another chance at catching 1 or 2 Shadow Pokémon you missed out on earlier on in the game. A process that will repeat itself until you've obtained every single available Shadow Pokémon, and Myra B destroys the tracker. Something I do not have footage of, so I'm stealing it instead. It's a fantastic change though, giving the player additional chances at building their dream team. There's no denying. And you're given even more options to do so too. There are 4 tradable Pokémon to obtain, the free Johto starters by beating Mount Battle, and even wild Pokémon. Yet another change that brings XD more in line with the main titles. A change I dislike. Rather early on in the game, you are granted access to these Pokéspots. In here you can lay down some Pokésnakes that are available in your local supermarkets, after which the Pokespot monitor will go off at random, alerting you a wild Pokémon has taken the bait. There are 3 Pokéspots available, containing 3 Pokémon that fit the area theme. Aside from the fact that a total of 9 Pokémon makes this a very meager feature, I hate its inclusion in general. The focal point of the game is the inclusion of the soulless fighting machines that are the Shadow Pokémon, and snagging them, aka stealing them, from the sharp-dressed baddies. In my humble opinion, while Pokémon have no place in the story a game like this is trying to convey. It undermines its whole gimmick to an extent, and I'm afraid the wild Pokémon numbers would have only exponentially grown the more entries this arc, for the lack of a better term, would receive. A very, very wrong direction to move in, and most definitely a certified TPC moment. Not this fucking jingle again. Doesn't change the fact that I made use of them though, grabbing myself a Zubat that would never evolve into a Crobat, no matter how much I soothbelled it up in battle. Didn't make the battles any less entertaining though. Admittedly, they are still these slow and unnecessarily drawn out battles, taking an eternity to play out a turn because of Shadow Sky's animation having to play 4 consecutive times, and Leftovers recovery to add the icing on the table. It definitely has its charm though. Shit just looks great. Even better than Colosseum in fact, improving its character models, battle animations, overworld animations, interiors and exteriors. I absolutely love the arrogant little Roselia acting all unfazed, Walrein spinning in circles like upon being hit, the fucking Cypher peons practically dying upon defeat. Gunzap is being such a diva for no reason, man. Just take the L. Buddy, you're a areas feel much less like battle gauntlets this time around, and more like actual locations that bring about a sense of immersion. There's now room for exploration rather than battle after battle, and even some undemanding yet adding a lot of gameplay value type of puzzles, similar to what you'd experience in i.e. Victory Road, pushing a few boxes here and there and type of shit like that. A modest switch up that becomes even more valuable once you start paying attention to the game's much improved approach to world building. I could linger around here for hours, honestly. Nothing but ambient noise, a floating Pokeball hologram, and the cosmetic waterfalls forming ripples on the water surface. It's a little zen moment before taking on a good old Snaddle. XD's world feels more like a world, and is vastly more interesting as such. Rooms now have silly little details, and 99% of the player base won't even glance at. But make my fucking day. Michael's bedroom has all these hoops, model planes and footballs. Random NPC rooms have all these trash cans, flower pots, scattered around papers and suitcases for nothing but its aesthetic appeal. The Cypher key layer has all these mysterious scientific machines, supplies and tools, a conveyor belt full of shadow Pokémon, and is shrouded in basement lighting, trying to assert its dominance upon arrival. The world isn't designed around the battles. Instead, the battles contribute to shaping the world, making for some of the best usage of areas in any Pokémon game. I cannot emphasize enough how much I enjoy the multi-layered, multi-floor dungeons, with every floor having a different purpose, layout, vibes and all that. Almost adventure game-ish. as if final boss, epicenter of Cypher operations, Sida Dark Isle, wasn't cool enough already. It is the pinnacle of exactly that. It's impressive from the very first moment, when you approach the flowing lava, a rocky mountain volcano hideout in the middle of the sea by the means of the robot Kyogre. The start of a multi-hour adventure through power generator rooms, a boiling hot magma puzzle areas, and that one SpongeBob episode.
Does this look dangerous?
Until you reach Greevil's hidey hole and partake in the coolest battles of the game. It's fucking brilliant. I love this final dungeon, with all of its vastly different areas and Cypher peons to plow through. Truly worthy of facilitating the game's finale. Pokémon XD, A Gale of Darkness, is without a doubt a better game than Pokémon Colosseum. Setting aside its limitations of the era in which it was created, and I've addressed in depth in my video on Colosseum, it's a fucking fantastic sequel. Improved world building, improved team building flexibility, a much more fleshed out Shadow Pokémon mechanic, and even better character and Pokémon animations. Soundtrack is easily on par with Colosseum too, meaning it clears the vast majority of Pokémon OSTs. Something I didn't even realize has been rather underwhelming ever since Black and White 2, until writing this down. Sure, it reuses a lot of Colosseum's tracks and was thus set up for success, but its very own tunes blend in seamlessly. Hit it! Even though it has an uneventful post-game, it makes up for that with the inclusion of various Colosseum challenges, the fun Mount Battle Gauntlet, and what is easily the coolest feature ever in any Pokémon game, with the Battle CD Simulator. Given to you through story progression or found at random by i.e. talking to a cast form, and then used in Realgam Tower. These battle CDs provide you some unique as fuck puzzles with preset rules, success and fail states that touch upon the deepest, most hidden intricacies of the battle system that even a seasoned player like me can learn a thing or two from. From KOing your own Pokémon to gain an advantage, messing around with Porygon's conversion and killing 6 Pokémon in one turn, but also the coin toss that is the Metronome Showdown. These 50 CDs added an additional couple of hours to my game time that I could easily call my favorite. A phenomenal addition to both learn from and enjoy. Room Next Door has XD's other unique feature, that is the Battle Bingo, which is bingo but with Pokemon battles, strategy and resource management to complete the bingo card. A feature that is fun enough, but is completely overshadowed by its big brother, Next Door. It's a luxury problem of two cool, unique features. XD Gale of Darkness is a game that still has every right to flex on even the modernest of modern mainline entries, and even its predecessor, thanks to all of its improvements. But I will forever value Colosseum over it. Colosseum dared to step out of its comfort zone by switching up most, if not every single aspect of what we had come to know and had become used to. A sinistrous overtone, outstanding characters with mature dialogue, a world resembling a crime-riddled Wild West, and gameplay that dared to put up its middle finger to the established status quo by adding a layer of difficulty through high-level enemies that apply actual strategies, and axing the Pokédex to about 12%. It dared to be its own entity. XD, as much as it improves on Colosseum's core mechanics, is a step back to the comfort zone. I love the inclusion of more than double the amount of obtainable Pokémon for the sake of team building and replayability, but it ultimately is a harbinger of the future of further entries, where they would have likely inched even closer to the usual amount of Pokémon and expanded upon the wild Pokémon Pokéspots, and thus undermine the whole snag mechanic the game is built upon. I think there's value in the lack of resistance leading up to the finale, as it puts an emphasis on Cedar Dark Isle and its more challenging Cypher homeboys to truly make it feel like the final stretch. The third rematch against Goregon and against Greevil's full Shadow Pokemon team with the 3 legendary birds at the pinnacle of Cedar Dark. They were pure fucking dopamine boosters, pushing me to my limit. Feather than Spitjot being the thing that would pull me over the line to not get battered at the finish line. I even had to take a 2-hour detour to train up this Elekid from level 20 onwards, so I wouldn't get my teeth kicked in against the final couple of Cypher admins. Shit's exciting and engaging, but suffers from the same mainline issue Colosseum so accurately eliminated. Why does it take 14 hours to get to the fun part? Sure, you get 20 hours of game time opposed to Colosseum's 12.5, but what's the value if the majority of it is a walk in the park? It reintroduces the boring opening segment I've grown so fucking tired of in mainline Pokemon, and only dares to challenge you for the final stretch of the game. Which, admittedly, is still better than whatever this is.
So to answer the question, can you beat Pokemon Heart Gold while avoiding every possible battle? Is yes. And it's way too fucking easy.
but is telling of the accessibility over engagement direction the spin-off was ultimately heading back towards. These are two important adjustments influencing my preference. It is the overarching atmosphere, however, that will forever be the deciding factor. XD now is nothing but a standard baddies trying to take over the world plot, told through far less interesting and mature vibes and characters, using the same language as the same old. Don't get me wrong here, it's good enough for what it is. It's far from as mind-numbing as Sword and Shield's light-hearted Darkest Day, which I still like but just isn't as interesting as a touching storyline, so please shut the fuck up. But does drop down the Pokémon plot rankings. I simply cannot put this over, i.e. the end manipulation character development arc, or Lily's personal growth reaching its climax against toxic ass Lusamine. Even the recent Scarlet and Violet Arven storyline easily takes over Grandpa Grievel's plans. It's not bad by any means, but by not standing out like Colosseum did, all that's left is something rather bland, that is easily XD's most prominent step in the wrong direction. I like XD. I really do. If Colosseum is a 10, then this is a 9. I appreciate Genius Sonority for adding these two unique takes on Pokémon to its bulky catalog, while knowing nothing about Pokémon to begin with. Which is probably why Colosseum's finalized product in particular came out as such a statement in the first place, honestly. But I think it's for the better these spin-offs never became a trilogy, as they seem to be going down the path of becoming just another Pokémon game, doing little to nothing to stand out from the crowd, thus defeating their whole purpose whatsoever and leaving a stain on a legacy, like recency bias unfortunately always does. And they deserve to be remembered for so much more than that. I don't know who was in charge of the important decisions during this game's development cycle, nor do I really care enough about pointing fingers. I just think taking a step back to the same old nonsense they had been and still are selling us, rather than continuing Colosseum's bold and innovative path, is not only whack as fuck, but also robbed us of what could have been the coolest, most mature, and fleshed out adventure the franchise had ever seen. And that just makes me sad.